In the last demo, we kind of went over the basic introduction, getting app to run locally, developing that app locally, and then deploying and running that app in production on any cloud provider. And now what I wanted to spend some time on was really focusing on the production functionality, the dashboard tool set, and just really how do you run your app in production? How do you scale? How do you scale this application? And how do you introspect into this application? So so I'm really just going to kind of go line by line through all of the different functionality that encompasses all of the various behaviors that you would want as the application developer to be able to manage this app in production. Keeping in mind that Nanobox really takes all of the hard parts out, and so you as the developer, the application developer, are in the driver's seat. You can drive your app, and you don't need to learn or specialize in DevOps or all of the other um, specialization that you might need to run a production infrastructure, and yet you get all of that functionality. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in here. So right now we just launched an app on a really small DigitalOcean droplet. And that's going to work just fine for small testing applications, or maybe just do a quick demo that you want to be publicly accessible. But it's certainly not going to work for most production apps. And so we're gonna walk through what scaling looks like. Before we do that, let's just take a look at some of the tooling that we have available to help us know when and how to scale. So if we open up our app components, this is going to show us all of the application components that are running on this particular droplet. Or in other providers, they might call them servers or compute units or EC2 instances. And we have a web process and a database. So those are isolated components that can be scaled individually. They're running inside of isolated Docker containers, and we can see the health and the metric breakdown and kind of what they're using, so we can see that neither of them are really using up any CPU, and the database is using about 9% of this droplet's RAM, and the web process is using 15. We can also see the platform components, and these platform components are all of the pieces that that are basically providing all of this functionality. So if it wasn't made clear in the first, I'll just make it clear again. There's no global system. There's no global Nanobox system that is kind of the centralized store for all of your for running your app. Everything that is required to run your app is running on your in this case this single droplet. Everything. The dashboard that I'm using simply connects into that and provides a way to manage it via the dashboard. And I can do the exact same thing here. I can see the breakdown, how much RAM and how much CPU these are using. Okay, and now before we start into scaling, I want to drop into the stats here. And we can, and what we have here is we have on the right hand side we have the real time, the right now health indicator. So we can see that 5% of this machine is being used. The CPU is being used. 45% of the RAM no swap and very 17% disk. Now we've dumbed that into a simple indicator. Green smiley face, you're all good. And of course, if you see a red frowny face, things are not so good. And then off to the left here, you'll see as time goes by, and we just launched this app, and so 24 hours from now, you would actually be able to see a historical breakdown, each of these representing an hour. Now we can also dive into the stats and get some more information. And again, after about 48 hours, this becomes a lot more useful. 28 to 48 hours, we start to see trends and patterns, and we can start to spot trends. Like for instance, we start to see that CPU gets used a lot more at 6 p.m. Than the rest of the day. And again, once this app has been up for longer than 24 hours, you'll actually be able to see those trends. For now, we really can just see the right now a little bit bigger. We could also filter this by date range as time goes by. As we're dragging this slider, we would be able to see this. And we can also see the resource usage breakdown of this particular server. We can see that our database is using 8% of the RAM. The web service, our Python web app, is using 15%. The platform, which is all of the platform components together, is using 21% of the RAM. And then, of course, it looks like we have a rounding issue here, the bug that needs to be fixed. But no, the system's not actually giving back RAM. We just have a slight rounding issue in the JavaScript that needs to be fixed. But all in all, we have 55% of the RAM free and 95% of the CPU. So really, if I'm looking at this, now this is just this is a very trivial application, but if I'm looking at this, I have no intuition that's telling me that I need to scale, because everything is performing wonderfully. Now, so I don't need to scale. Now, if I did need to, I have some options. Now, if I wanted to run this app, continue running this app all on one server, I can scale up the server. So if I click scale, I start to see all of the different options become available. So I could just take this entire server and scale it up. And these plans are just reflective of the underlying plans that are provided by, in this case, DigitalOcean. So I've got my high memory or just my standard. Now, I don't want to just scale up a single server, because with a single server I have no redundancy, and I also have no isolation. So what I would rather do in this case is I would rather take these pieces and break them out. So let's take, starting with my database, and let's move it. So I can move this database onto its own server. And coming shortly, you'll also see some redundancy options. Those will be made available in the dashboard. But for now, you can take and move this database out. And I simply pick the size of the server that I want. Let's say in this case that I just want it to run on one CPU core and 1 gig of RAM. And I want to be sure, because that is going to cost me money, and I'm going to go ahead and agree. So now Nanobox is going to order the server from my account, and then it's going to follow all the same process that we saw in the first, minus provisioning the platform, because the platform is already running on this first server. We have a nice visual indicator. So now we're actually provisioning that server. So let's go ahead and say, well, I want to do the same thing to my web, so I can move my web. Now with my web, I actually want to turn my web into a horizontal cluster. I don't want just one instance. I want maybe 3 instances of my web app at that smallest size, the 512 meg, 1 CPU core. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that. And Nanobox is going to do all of this in tandem. So if I want to do other things and I don't really want to watch the progress here, I can simply kind of roll that up and see the overview and move on to some other things. I get the visual overview as things are happening down here. But if this were a real app, I would imagine that I would be heavily interested in seeing this work. And you can see here that the server that's going to run our database is currently being provisioned, and all 3 instances of our the 3 servers that are the 3 instances of our application are also being provisioned. Looks like our database has already moved on. Now it's installing the Postgres Docker image. And hopefully, what we've really tried to do is provide a window into what's happening. So it's not required that you specialize or even know how any of this works, but you can see exactly how it's happening. And all the steps that you would have had to take if you were doing this manually, you can kind of see Nanobox walking through them for you. So with our database, once it gets up and running, which it is now, it's just going to make sure that everything's up to date. It's actually going to migrate the data from the previous component to the new one, and that's something to just kind of put your mind at ease. When you think about the growth of your application, one of the hardest things to do is migrate data, is to move data around in your production environment, and also manage the application's connections to it. Nanobox has a really nice virtual network. We handle all of the routing and all of the IP management underneath, and so so you don't have to worry about any of that, and you can have confidence knowing that while your app may be small now, at a certain scale you are going to need to grow, and you're not going to have to worry about a complicated database migration, because Nanobox is going to do that for you. So the database has been migrated, and now the previous, and after it actually confirms, it checksums the data, and it's confirmed that the data is in the new database. It removes the old one. It updates all of the routing, as we mentioned before, all of the networking, and and now it looks like our web service has been moved as well. So now on this first server, we have no application components deployed on this host because they've all been moved off. And in the case of our Postgres database, it's on its own server. It's the only thing on that server. And in the case of our web service, it's actually a cluster of multiple hosts. And let's just make sure that our application still works, and it does. The application is still live. So the advantage of having a platform, the load balancer, and all of the all of the other components installed here is that we were able to make all of this migration. We were able to completely restructure your application, and really think about that. Think about if you were the developer or the systems admin that just had to do what you just saw happen. Right? You have your application running on one server, and now you need to break it off into its own. And you had to order 3 other servers and run the application, your web application on it, and you had to order another server, get the database running, migrate the data, and then update your load balancer or your however you're proxying connections to now these 3 instances without any downtime. And that's what Nanobox gives you. So Nanobox is a production scale and is a production ready platform to handle the needs of your application, and you could still scale this original server. You could scale this original one. And additionally, you can take your platform components one by one individually, and you can move them around as well, the same as you do for your app components. And all of the while, your application is going to stay online. Now, there will be a small blip as we're cutting your database over, just to make sure that we don't have any data inconsistencies. At the very last minute, we got to take a clean snapshot and shut it off for just a half second while we synchronize the differences. But all in all, you can see that that very, very easily and without any expertise required, you can really take your application from just a really simple, small, contrived application to a production scale in a matter of minutes. So I'll come back to scaling and show you some cool things again, but what I want to do now is kind of walk through some of the other concerns. So what about logging? Like I've got my app split across all these different servers. So how can I see all of my logs? Do I have to log into each server? No, all of the logs are aggregated. You can see all of the logs across all of the different components, your Postgres database, your web services, even across your platform services. You can see them all aggregated here, and even in a nice copy, selectable, pastable way and you can even make that your whole screen. Now we've got 2 different ways of viewing your logs. You can see them after the fact, historical, or you can subscribe to the live stream. And if you just sit here, anytime any of your service starts to log something, you would see it come across here. So that's how Nanobox simplifies logging. And again, just keep in mind, you didn't have to do anything to make that work. It's part of the platform that Nanobox provides. We also can see, and in this app, we actually deployed this app 2 different times. And I could redeploy back to the broken state where our app didn't have, where it had that broken host. I could do that. I mean, it would be a little bit silly to do that, but I'll do it anyways. Now we can see, it's really, really quick to do that. And in fact, if I go back over to our dashboard, I can see exactly what's happening. And this is going to now update across all 3 instances, redeploy, kind of roll back to that broken point on all 3 instances, and at the very last minute, so yeah, it's pretty much building a new cluster, but it doesn't have to order new servers, right? It's just it can use the same servers. It just runs new services in new containers, and the routing mesh is going to handle the takeover. So there was really no downtime. Now the app's going to be broken here. Maybe I redeployed to the wrong one here. let's see, which one did I redeploy? Oh, I probably redeployed the wrong one. I probably redeployed it to the one that was fixed. Anyways, you can see that you can redeploy any point in history that has been deployed. Now, one of the other advantages, or one of the challenging parts of running an application, is it needs to be encrypted. Your application, pretty much nowadays, every application, even if it's just a trivial application, needs to be encrypted. So we have integrated a lot of different ways to encrypt your app, and I'll show you one. So really easily, I can just go and say, I'm going to add a certificate for this app, and I'm just going to send that to no thanks at nanobox.io, organization, city. Okay, and I can now create a, whoops, oh, should have saw that one. I can't put in a URL, need to put in a domain. Okay, so create the certificate. Now that I have a certificate, I can create an encrypted bundle, and I have one of 4 options. I can use Let's Encrypt, and we have integrated directly with Let's Encrypt. I can do a self-signed, third-party new, or third-party import. And Let's Encrypt is the easiest, so let's do that now. So I've created a Let's Encrypt cert. It is initializing. Looks like it's ready to go. I can now activate that cert. And here very shortly, and all of this integration is happening automatically behind the scenes. It is now activated, so I could come to this application and run it with HTTPS, and I am fully encrypted. So again, without having any expertise and without having to do anything, I was able to fully encrypt my application. I can also set configuration. I can set environment variables. Nanobox has generated some environment variables for me as a convenience, so my application can connect to my database host, can connect to the user and password. But I can also add others. I can also add custom environment variables, and then the next time that I redeploy, those environment variables would be available to the running application. And as a convenience, we also show the box file, which is the the Nanobox configuration of the currently active deploy. You may also be wondering how you can add team members, and that's one of the real nice things about Nanobox is that you can add team members simply by invitation. They need to create an account on Nanobox, but once they do, you can simply add them, invite them, and if they by email, and if they accept your invitation, they become either an owner or a developer of your application, giving them access to the dashboard and the ability to deploy the application, and even direct console access. And one thing I'm going to just mention here, and we showed this in the previous demo, but I'll show it again. Access to all of your infrastructure and your servers and containers has been really simplified. So I can access this my database by using Nanobox directly, and it drops me right into the server running my database. And what I wanted to mention here is that simply as soon as you give somebody access, they can they now have access as well. You don't have to manage SSH keys. You don't have to run through some provisioning process. It's really simple. And again, and also I would say, as somebody leaves your team, you remove them and immediately they lose all access. So there's really no cumbersome process involved to reset passwords or to provision SSH keys, or even have a key server. Nanobox handles all of that, all of that authentication. And really, one other thing here as a convenience. So you can see all of the hosts of this cluster, and I can either, for this first instance, I can either console directly into the server that's running this and see that, or I can console directly into the container running on that, and I can see that that's running. So it's really convenient. Nanobox really simplifies the ability to maintain access, and in no way does Nanobox ever ever lock you out. There's nothing that you can do on Nanobox where you would get stuck. Every action that you invoke, you can cancel mid-routine, and Nanobox will roll it back safely. And also, you have direct access to everything, so you can get in there, you can get your hands dirty, you can fix something, and if you mess it up, it can be undone. Now, the caveat to that is, if you mess up your data, sorry, you're kind of on your own there. Okay, so back to the scaling, and this is kind of where we'll wrap it up here. Is I wanted to show how easily you can shuffle things around, and so we started this by breaking everything out of the single server. But what if I want to put it all back? So what if I just want to take this and move it back? And actually, before I do this, I want to show just a couple of things. So I can actually scale this cluster up. So if 3 instances isn't enough, and all of a sudden I've got a high spike in traffic, and I need and everything's coming crashing down, and I just need more, scale it up, submit, and everything will be better. You don't have to, and everything will automatically be provisioned for you. And you can also you also have all of the operations that you need to start and restart the processes, to reboot the containers, to completely replace the containers, update them to the latest stable config, or even some advanced configuration for environment variables. Okay, so so back to where we were headed with this. We scaled this app up, and now we want to bring it all back onto that single one. And just to highlight here, if we were to look at our DigitalOcean panel, we would notice that that Nanobox has ordered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because there's 3 instances here. So I would have 5 servers running. So you can, so again, with Nanobox, hopefully I'm making it clear that with Nanobox you can start small, you can scale up as high as you need, and you can bring it all back. And you can rearrange your configuration. You can have it all on a single beefy server that you scale up. It can also be, you can also take your components, which is highly recommended, and move them off of a single server so that you get some redundancy. So you can see here that we have some redundancy because we have more than one web component, and also database redundancy will be available here shortly. Okay, so now let's say I want to move this back. So I want my web cluster to go back onto a single. Now I can actually put it, and I'll actually show you this here. I can put it anywhere. I can put it either on the first server or the second one. So if I put it on the second one, that's going to put it where my database is. I can go ahead and do that. So now you can see that it's going to take my web service and it's going to put it alongside my database. Now this will actually be much quicker because we're not actually ordering and provisioning servers in the background, we're going to reuse that one, and we just have to install a Docker image, and we're up and running. However, it is worth noting that just by moving it out of a cluster and back onto a server, that there will only be one instance. You can't have multiple instances if you're running on one server. There's no point. So after this Docker image is installed, it is going to provision the now one application, fetch the application and runtime. And this is the application and runtime that we deployed in the first demo. So it's the same one, and every time we deploy, we get a new application and runtime that it's going to pull from, and all of that is stored in your platform components running on your servers again. And now it's going to cancel those servers. So if we were to look at our DigitalOcean panel, we would now see 3 less servers, and we were able to roll that into the one server. Well, and here's what's interesting. So we still have no app components on the first server, but we have all of our platform. And this is a viable use case as well. I mean, let's say you just want to isolate your platform from your application, and this is a viable use case. You can do that. Here's your application running from that, and you're doing it with only 2 servers. But I could take this one step further, and I could open up the app components here, and I could say, that was great, but now I want to move it onto DO1. Whoops, I want to move it to an existing host, not onto a new one. Okay, and it's going to do the same thing that it just previously did, where it is going to just going to take it up and install it on the first server. So you can see it provisioning on that one now. And once that's up and running, you'll actually see it decommissioning off of the previous server. And while we're at it, let's do the same thing here to our data. Let's move it back to our existing. There we go. Okay, and now we are going to move it back. So, so just like that, we took our application, we split it across a bunch of servers, and now we're bringing it all back under the same kind of 512, and you can see here that it's going to migrate the data again. And even though this database doesn't have much data, it does take a little bit longer, and that's just because of all of the checksumming that's involved. We'll make an initial transfer while the application is still connecting to it. Then once that is completed, we will actually shut off the service, and we will snapshot. We'll take a snapshot of the difference, and we will send that difference over. And then we're going to compare the checksums, make sure that the data in the new location matches what it was in the old before we just go and destroy that container. And now that there is absolutely nothing on this, so I can, thank you Flex, I can now delete this host because there's nothing on it. It wouldn't have let me do that before. And we're right back to where we started. A single tiny host, and the application is still working. Everything's just fine with SSL encryption. So even though we moved the app all the way around, the SSL encryption stayed intact. All the while we could have been watching our logs as all these things are moving around. Yep, so we can see here that our database was moving around, and we have an app that's up and running the whole time. So there's now there's other things that we could have gone into in more detail, and we'll probably do that in later demos, like how to how to set up your database for redundancy, and also how to recover from issues, or how to reboot and how to restore. But I think that should cover most of the production scenarios. And what I really hope that you were able to take from this is that, one, hopefully you were able to kind of capture the vision of Nanobox, in that you really don't have to learn anything new. You don't have to be an expert. You can get all of the advantages of running your app on a platform, and without being locked in and locked down on a platform. It is your infrastructure running on your provider account, and Nanobox is simply the micro platform that manages that. So that's the first thing. Hopefully you get is just how you can now do everything that, as a developer, that you always wanted to do, but really didn't have the time to become an expert in, and you didn't have to learn anything new. And the second thing is that this isn't a toy. Nanobox is ready for running production scale apps. You can scale it up very big. You can scale up your database be a redundant cluster on top of very large machines, and your application can be a scalable cluster that you can move up and down. And the platform is doing all the heavy lifting for you. So it's Nanobox really easy. Allows you to be really allows you to be the hero and have all of the capabilities that you've always wanted. And it's not a toy. You're not locked in, and it's for running real production grade applications. So hopefully that's given you a good sense of what can be done, and hopefully in the next little while we'll create some other demos to show you some more advanced usage. So thanks.